2 days out now. Some days I sit upstairs thinking, should we talk about this or not? It's so obviously desperate and profoundly hypocritical, to the point of actually being a national embarrassment, the way that the Tories and elements of the client media have tried to inflate this story about Keir Starmer having dinner on Fridays. Should we give it attention? Do we inflate it by giving it oxygen? Do we actually bring it to the attention of people who may be stupid enough to think that it is in some way damaging to Keir Starmer? And some days I think, no, I probably shouldn't give it any more attention. And other days I sort of think, well, if people are going around hosing the electorate with liquid manure, then perhaps it's our job to go around afterwards hosing them down with scented soap water. I honestly don't know. I honestly don't know. I guess it's subject dependent, isn't it? It's got something to do with context. Imagine, if you would, for a moment, how Tory politicians and client journalists, the kind of Tory journalists who were pro-Boris Johnson, pro-Brexit, pro-Liz Truss, pro-Rishi Sunak, pro-austerity, pro-David Cameron, pro-cuts. You can probably think of a few off the top of your head. Imagine how they would be behaving today if a left-wing politician or commentator, let us invoke the ghost of Jeremy Corbyn or a Diane Abbott or a Keir Starmer or an Angela Rayner, had attacked a Tory politician for observing Friday night dinner with their Jewish husband or wife. Just imagine for a minute what the headlines and what the spittle-flecked commentators would be spewing this morning if a left-wing politician had attacked a Jewish family or a politician with a Jewish wife for observing the Friday night tradition of having a family dinner. He gave an interview to the rather splendid mother and daughter podcasting team of Jesse and Lenny Ware. I think it was last year. I've had the great privilege of going on that podcast myself, and it is an enormous amount of fun. And they have this incredible gift of getting you to relax. I'm not a politician, so you don't need to get me to relax. But they managed with Keir Starmer to lead him into territory where I don't think he had necessarily been before. And the Jewish Chronicle picked up on this story last year. Remember, anybody pretending today to think that this is damaging to Keir Starmer, you can know two things about them. Number one, they display their desperation like a forehead tattoo. And number two, they will be well aware of this story in the Jewish Chronicle in July of last year. They just may be pretending not to be. But the phrase he used was really nice and really special, the weekly tradition of Friday night dinners. I won't do a Friday night event. I choose to spend the evening at home with my family for Shabbat. He's not Jewish himself. His wife is, and her dad often joins the family for Shabbat. He describes it as a rock in the week. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, Jeff says don't amplify the right-wing press and their inane headlines, but the headlines are out there. I genuinely don't know whether or not it falls to us some mornings to provide some truth with which to balance out exaggerations and lies. But I would focus first on that simple thought of how the kind of people pretending today, Grant Shapps, pretending today that Keir Starmer has some sort of question to answer or that there's some sort of misstep here, how on earth they'd behave if a Jeremy Corbyn fan had attacked a right-wing politician for observing a Jewish family tradition on Friday nights. Just focus on that. Just think about that. That's all. Don't think about anything else with regard to this story. Just think about how the people pretending to be cross with Keir Starmer today would be behaving if the boot, as it were on the other foot. And then you get an indication of just how broken the Tory establishment is. Don't you? Client media just doesn't know what to do. Everything they dreamt of for 14 and a half years has happened. They got it all. They got every single thing they wanted. I was looking back at some of the headlines with which they greeted Liz Truss's budget, greeting it as the finest thing that had ever happened to the British economy, queuing up to pour praise onto a woman who often gave the impression of having an IQ in single figures. Nigel Farage, today was the best Conservative budget since 1986, he tweeted in September of 2022. They got every single thing they wanted. And look what's happened. This is what is so interesting to me as we near the home straight of this election, with, of course, nothing guaranteed, nothing certain, but they got every single thing they wanted for 14 and a half years, and it's come to this. I think we need to pause to register just how significant this is. Because, I can't remember a period in UK politics where so many victories were secured by the ruling party. I probably because of my age and my memory. But these are big things, Austerity was huge. We talked yesterday about youth clubs and the soul that has been ripped out of communities by the closure of youth clubs. And, of course, the impact that it has upon things like gang violence and youth crime. The austerity, shutting Sure Start centres, deciding on ideological grounds that the country's most vulnerable people were in receipt of too much largesse. The rhetoric of flat-screen TVs somehow becoming government policy. Nonsense rhetoric, lazy radio phone-in staples of the 1990s. Everybody unemployed is swinging the lead. Becoming government policy. And then they got their Brexit as well. The Brexit that they dreamed of without ever actually stopping to wonder what happens if the dog catches the car. What happens? And now we've found out. Again, Farage all over Boris Johnson's Brexit deal, praising it to the rafters the moment it was signed. Extraordinary to think that they told us Liz Truss's budget was brilliant. They told us Rishi Sunak was a safe pair of hands, a managerial genius who would come in and bring his financial nous to the entire country and turn things round at breakneck speed. 14 and a half years of getting every single thing they wanted. And look where they are today. Look where they are today. Not just the triviality, the short-term triviality of pretending to be cross that Keir Starmer eats on Fridays with his family, or tries to. The idea that if something significant was happening, he'd turn his phone off and lock himself in the loo. It's just too ridiculous even to contemplate, never mind talk about. And that's the little, trivial, momentary illustration of how desperate things are. A much bigger picture is probably best summed up in this article today from The Guardian, where it's reported a senior Tory has described Sunak's campaign as the worst in my lifetime. One senior party figure said yesterday it had been the worst campaign in my lifetime, saying that while Sunak was wholly to blame for the early election, there was a feeling that Isaac Levido, his advisor, his key strategist, could have pushed back more against the July date and that CCHQ should have taken the fight to reform earlier. There are so many factors to what I think everyone can agree, whether you are intending to vote Conservative on Thursday or not. I think everyone can see that this has been an extraordinarily bad campaign. And it's hard to pinpoint precisely why. How, after 14 and a half years of getting absolutely everything they wanted, has a party that has a centuries-old reputation for prioritising power above everything else, for having a ruthless commitment to power, to attaining and maintaining power, arguably the most successful electoral machine in the history of international politics. How has it come to this? How has it been reduced to a shower of charlatans and incompetence, pretending to be cross about the man most likely to be Prime Minister on Friday morning, revealing that he likes to have tea with his family on Fridays? I just want to look at why this has been the worst campaign of our lifetimes. Was it inevitable? I hope you share my curiosity on the question of how much of this was Sunak's fault and how much of this was somehow an inheritance. I mean, could a massive liar, could a better liar than Rishi Sunak have pulled it off? Could a Boris Johnson or a Nigel Farage, could a snake oil salesman par excellence have somehow pulled this off and separated themselves from 14 and a half years of getting everything they wanted while campaigning on how they're the people to repair the awfulness? There are days, aren't there, where you step back from it and you think to yourself, this is nuts. We are not a normal country anymore. 14 and a half years of getting every single thing they wanted and trying to campaign upon a promise to fix the mess. I think the beginnings of the answer to the question I'm asking perhaps lie there. Why has this campaign been so bad or mad and dangerous to know? But I find the simple detachment from what used to be normal almost impossible to process. It's not a hard. Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, where are you getting the half from? It's 14 years, isn't it? I think what I like to say is the best part of a decade and a half. The best part of a decade and a half. That's where the half comes from. I've misattributed the half. Forgive me. 10-15 is the time. 14 years then of getting absolutely everything they wanted. And they've ended up running what is, according to this senior Tory and many other supporters, traditional historic supporters of the party, running the worst campaign in living memory. Probably Michael Foot would be your go-to leader, but he wasn't, of course, campaigning as Prime Minister. 10:15 is the time. I don't know whether we're going to return in detail to this 6 p.m. on Friday's story. It's interesting to read the text. I share your disgust at how some elements of the Conservative establishment have chosen to treat that story, although I've written a book about how low right-wing media and right-wing politicians have been brought by the failure of all the things that they championed. But I don't want to do it first. I don't want to do it first. I want first to look at the broader Conservative campaign and the question of how, or why actually, why has it all been so awful? 0345 6060 973. In the interests of, I don't know if you want to call it balance or something else, you are welcome to ring me and tell me it hasn't been awful. But I mean, the Labour campaign has not been fireworks. They seem to have subscribed to the idea that it's pointless interrupting your enemy while they're soiling themselves, while they're making mistakes. But let's look at the big picture now. 14 years in power, winning every single victory that they strove for, certainly since 2015, when David Cameron secured that majority and dispensed with the need for coalition government. If you want to say right-wing, pro-Brexit, free market Tories, whether they are in the media or whether they are in Parliament, they have got every single thing they dreamt of, and look where they've left the country, and look what the party has been reduced to in the context of the current campaign. Take a deep breath, take a long run up, and tell me why this has been such an awful campaign. All right? 0345 6060 973. Why has this been so awful? There's something about the desperation on display today that cuts to the heart of what's been lost. Any semblance of integrity, any semblance of honesty, any semblance of consistency. Treating two politicians the same for the same behaviour regardless of what party they came from. My profession is broken, has been for years, probably since Rupert Murdoch bought The Sun. That decline began. But why has this campaign been so terrible?